Welcome back, everyone, to the Late Night Review. And tonight I'm going to talk about a classic, a true classic. And I probably should have did a review of this movie before I did a review of part 3 and 4 in the franchise. Um, and I'm talking about Friday the 13th, part 1. To me, this is a classic. I really do like it. And I'll admit it, I've always, ever since I was a kid, I was raised on these movies. You probably shouldn't be letting your kid watch this at that age, but I really always enjoyed these movies. I remember sitting on the floor at night and watching this, and they jumped. And this is a spoiler review. Almost all the videos that I do on the Late Night Review are spoiler reviews because I'm talking about movies that have been out for years and years and years. But yeah, I mean, I remember watching this and everyone jumped out or jumped up when Jason jumped out of the water at the end of the movie. So yeah, this is a movie I think is really a classic. And I did part 3 and 4 already on the channel. I actually like those a little bit better than this. 3, 4, and 6 are always fighting for my top spot. And I'll admit it, I've always liked the Friday the 13th films because I grew up watching them. I have a ton of nostalgia for them and seen them since I was a kid. Just sitting on the floor looking up at the TV. Other people are watching it. I'm watching it. Ugh. But this movie, I think, is a classic. And in the Friday the 13th franchise, usually people like the later films better. And I can understand. I actually like part 3, 4, and 6 the best. And there's some close second and thirds. I won't rank them tonight, maybe in the future. A lot of people prefer to watch a film called The Burning, which is another, is very similar to the Friday the 13th. The killer in there is called Cropsey, and it is a pretty creepy movie with the hedge clippers and then some other weapons that are used in the film. And I saw that too when I was a kid, but not nearly as much as the Friday the 13th films. I actually like Friday the 13th Part 1 quite a bit. I do think it's a strong, strong film in this entire franchise. One of the reasons I've always liked the Friday the 13th franchise is because I love nature. I like looking at the trees, the rivers, mountains, and the fact that it's taken place mostly in the forest and at camps, out in nature. That's one of the reasons. That's one of the things that always has drawn me. It drew me to the Friday the 13th franchise, and I've always liked it, always appreciated it. And one of the reasons I like Friday the 13th Part 1 so much, and I don't care at all that it's dark. In fact, as an artist, I've painted a lot of dark paintings with literal dark, where it's hard to see what's going on. I've done that before quite a few times, and it's kind of my style for certain paintings where they're not that bright. I actually like the darkness of Friday the 13th Part 1 in a literal lighting sense. I'm not talking about a evil, dark sense. I'm talking about the way the forest looks, kind of hard to see. I actually think it makes it more scary. I've never had a problem with that. I understand those who do, though, but just my own personal preference. I don't mind it too dark because it's more realistic. I think it's scarier with the darker shadows. You don't know where the killer is. So it works for me. I like Friday the 13th quite a bit. I like it better than The Burning. And for a few simple reasons. First of all, the score. The score in Friday the 13th, just so much better than The Burning, in my opinion. The second reason is because I think the story and the directing, the screenplay, and the acting is just so much better. I think it's just so much better. The film, I think the way it's shot. Another reason is how they build the suspense. I think in Friday the 13th Part 1, and this is even better than some of the installments later in the franchises, it's almost like Alfred Hitchcock building the tension. Where's the killer going to come out next? How's the person going to die? That dark shadow over there. There's a lamp. There's a door that looks kind of scary. There's a house or a cabin. There's bushes. There's certain scenes in this movie where it builds the tension more and more and more. When's the next kill going to take place? the tension build. I think the tension building in Friday the 13th Part 1 it's exceptional. It does it better than almost any other horror movie. I mean, it's among the best in terms of building tension and the score and the way the screenplay is and how the actors look around to their surroundings and you think something's going to happen. I really think it does a great job building the tension. And I grew up watching this movie, but recently I rewatched it again to brush up and just realizing what a classic this is. I do think sometimes it's a little underrated by people. I think it's almost like I said, I mentioned Alfred Hitchcock. It does a great job building the tension. In the first one, people don't really know who the killer is. And then a lot of people assume it's Jason. You know, everyone knows about this film already and all that for the most part. I mean, there's some people who haven't seen the most popular films. There's certain films that are super popular that just came out that people haven't even seen. But oh, this movie's been out for years and years. I do think it's a classic. I think Betsy Palmer does a great job as Pamela Voorhees. And someone told me when she was young, really young, she was Miss America. And then I thought that was correct. And then later I looked it up on the internet, and I haven't found anything about it. I couldn't find out if she was or wasn't. So if I said that in another video, I might have to take that back. I'm not sure. But I always appreciated her. I always thought that she did a really good acting job in various films that I'd seen her in. For example, she was in a movie called Tin Star that I remember watching with Anthony Perkins and Henry Fonda. Anthony Perkins was a kind of an insecure sheriff, and Henry Fonda was kind of the experienced gunfighter that kind of taught Anthony Hopkins and mentored him. And he needed a room to stay at in this town, so Betsy Palmer lived at if I remember the movie right, it was Betsy Palmer living in this house where her and her son lived, and Henry Fonda rented a room from her. And then there's a relationship that Henry Fonda had with her, you know, kind of developed, and I can't remember how far it went, but it was a good movie. Tin Star, Betsy Palmer, Henry Fonda, Anthony Perkins. I think she's a really good actor and does a really good job. And I think that she really fits the part. She really, really does, and how she plays the killer. And you can that all that mommy, don't let him get away, mommy, and she's talking to herself. You got a little bit of the psycho element in her. You know, as Norman Bates copied his mother, she kind of speaks for her son Jason and tries to avenge him. You know the story. Pretty much everyone knows the story by now. Classic. I think this is a classic movie. I think in young Kevin Bacon, and one of my favorite scenes that I don't think gets appreciated enough is when Kevin Bacon's girlfriend in the movie explains her dreams, and it's raining and the rain turns to blood and the blood washes away in little streams, and how she's telling that story right before the storm comes in, and it's dark, it's dusk, and it's, you know, it's overcast and everything. I think this movie looks really interesting. I think there's a lot of scenes in here. There's a lot of storytelling that is so good. And Friday the 13th Part 1, I think, is a classic. I really do think it's a classic. And the way she tells the story about the blood being washed away in little streams or streams of blood, and she's telling Kevin Bacon about that, I think that really helps set the atmosphere even more. You have red herrings. You don't know who the killer is. First, you might think it's the guy Steve with the Jeep. He's driving around because the killer also has a Jeep. People are guessing who the killer is. So yeah, when this movie first came out, it was pretty impactful. And of course, that scene at the end where Jason comes out of the water. I remember my uncle, my dad, my cousin, they jumped. I was sitting on the floor. I was watching it. I thought it was scary too. And I usually don't get scared by movies. The only movie that ever really scared me was Omen. Omen 1, 2, and 3, the original. Exorcist never really scared me that much, even though I always thought The Exorcist, and still do, is a classic. I actually like Exorcist 3 the best out of that whole. I have a lot of nostalgia for Exorcist 3. I saw that when it came out. Um, Part 2 sucked, but Yeah, those are Exorcist 1 is a classic. I like 3 even more. But there's certain scenes from certain movies that scared me as a kid, but normally I never would get scared by any movie except The Omen, the first 2 or 3 Omens, first 3 Omens. But the scene when he jumps out and how Jason looked, actually, it did scare me a little bit when I was a kid, and it got some other people jumped. I think it was my uncle, my dad, and a few other people when he came back because no one was expecting it. You had the calm music, the beautiful water. She's on the boat, she's touching the water. You got everything, the trees, and then he comes out and that gave me a couple nightmares. I remember having a reoccurring nightmare with more than one with Jason. But it was a very memorable scene and one of the most classic jump scares scenes of all time of any film, Friday the 13th Part 1. But yeah, I think it's well done. It started them all. Friday the 13th Part 1 started them all. Without Part 1, you couldn't have the sequels. But Halloween, my gosh, the original Halloween deserves a lot of credit because Friday the 13th was in competition with Halloween. Friday the 13th came out after Halloween, so Halloween was a pioneer. Without Halloween, do we get Friday the 13th? That's an interesting question. Do we get Friday the 13th without Halloween? I kind of suspect we would, but you never know. You never know. That's a question maybe for another video. But yeah, this is a classic movie. Friday the 13th Part 1, I do think is a classic. I think it does deserve a little more credit, though, than it has gotten. But each to his own. Everyone has their own opinion. I'm very libertarian when it comes to movies. Everyone to each his own. Everyone has their own favorite movies, especially in certain franchises. This is a very strong entry in this franchise. It's the first one ever, and I do like it quite a bit. I do think it deserves to be a classic. I think the tension building, like I said earlier, it's so well done. The cinematography, I like personally. The darkness doesn't really bother me. I think it adds to the scare. The classic, very classic score. The score that kind of started it all with this franchise, and they added on to it later. But yeah, I do think it's a classic. I recommend it if you haven't seen it. Almost everyone has, but if you haven't seen this movie, probably younger generations perhaps haven't seen it. But if you haven't, I think you're in for a treat. Check it out. This has been the Late Night Review. Please like and subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and share this video. And have a good night, everybody. Take care.